Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Ask Abhijit show. I hope everyone's doing great. I welcome you wherever you are, east, west, north, south, inside India, outside of India. Welcome. It's been a couple of weeks since we did this live. We did the last episode of this show, and as everyone is remarking, a lot has changed in the world. A lot is happening, so we're gonna hopefully deal with that. Hopefully, you ask questions that are relevant to all of that. I'm gonna take questions from the live chat, and let me see who all is there in the live chat right now. I can see Debaran Bhattacharya, Cosmic Gaming 7781, Rudra, Jeet, Pamal Nandi, Deep Kajole, Air Warriors, Anurag, Saurabh Singha, Curious RC, Gaurav, been a while, Art the Clown, Amisha Mishra, hello, Crick X Raj Official, Vineet Sangle, Gopi S, Netizen, Ayush Pandey, Annabeth Jackson, Saurav Sarkar, Manisha Cardozo, Siddhant Bharatiya Edits, Srivatsa, Rushi, do I remember you? I do remember you. Yes, welcome back, sir. Skull, Brijesh SK, Himanshu Raj Purohit, Arpit Agarwal, Sally Ramram, Mriganka Bonia, Ben Alex Mapper, Feminist Slayer, hello. Dhruv Kumar, DK, Red, Viraj Deshmukh, Aru, and Avyansh, Pavan Kumar Singh, Vinay, Esman, Samana Satish, hello. HS10, Akash BA, Mr. Mauritius, Jethalal Gada, Trupti Patil, present, yes. Pranav Sharma, Rudra, Shashank Kaushik, Einstein Who, Ayush Pandey, Sunil C, uh, Clash with Pushkar, and everybody else. So I'm gonna stop that now, and please go ahead and ask your questions. Let's take some questions. A lot happening in the world, like many of you have remarked. Okay, let us take this question by Air Warriors. The question, okay, two questions here. Firstly, has Russia supplied ready-made nuclear weapons or its technology to Iran? And my views on the unexpected earthquake in Iran. Secondly, will Russia and China come in Iran's defense if Israel attacks Iran? Interesting questions, very relevant to what's happening, the things that have changed in the world in recent days, weeks. So yes, recently, about a week or so ago, roughly give or take, there was an unexpected earthquake in Iran, in a part of Iran, a region of Iran that is not prone to seismic excitement, let's say, seismic activity. If we could go to the map, okay, good. We can crack out the map on the very first question of today's episode, but let's take a look at the map. So here we have the map. Okay, we are to come back to the subcontinent area and go slightly westwards, and that's where we have Iran. And you can see in the north of the country, you have Tehran, which is slightly south of the Caspian Sea. And in this region, more or less, there's been an earthquake. Now, this region is not prone to earthquakes, seismic activity, etc. And yet, this happened. It was what was how much did it measure on the Richter scale? I think around four something, 4 point something, or maybe 5 point something, which is not very powerful of an earthquake and not very small an earthquake either. So that's the kind of thing that's happened. Now, what else apart from an earthquake can cause seismic activity? Obviously, an underground nuclear test. And maybe Iran is sending a message to its adversaries and also to its friends, perhaps. So, look, those of you who are regular watchers of this show know that I have said several times in the past few months that I believe Iran would probably already have a few nuclear weapons. They have a pretty mature uranium enrichment program. They've been doing that for a very long time, a couple of decades at least. Uranium enrichment via centrifuges that process uranium hexafluoride, which is a gas. So I am sure they have sufficient fissile material for a handful, whatever that means, of nuclear weapons, nuclear warheads. So I actually, if you ask me today, I believe that there are 10 nuclear powers in the world, 10 nations with nuclear weapons, and I believe Iran would be one of those. So I'm pretty sure Iran is a nuclear weapons power by now. I mean, they haven't officially announced it, but maybe that earthquake was a signal to nations like Israel and the US and whoever else that, listen, don't cross certain lines. And yeah, so I don't believe that Russia would have supplied nuclear weapons or technology to Iran. Maybe some kind of aid in some indirect way, perhaps, but I don't think Russia would actually supply nuclear weapons, ready-made weapons to Iran. Maybe some kind of aid in terms of enrichment technology or something, but not beyond that. Most likely, of course, I could be wrong, but look, this is all speculation. We don't know what's really happening. And I appreciate that you asked me whether Russia has done this, but I am not on talking terms. I mean, I'm not privy to what Mr. Putin does and what happens there. Right? These are extremely secret matters, highly classified. So can't comment about that. But I believe by now that by now Iran is a nuclear weapons power. They most likely have a handful, whatever that means, of nuclear warheads. Maybe 10, maybe 20, whatever it is. And they have a tremendous ballistic missile and cruise missile capabilities, right? As they have demonstrated. So and the last attack that happened, the attack that Iran did on Israel with missiles, with a whole with about 200 missiles. Many of those missiles hit the targets, and many of these missiles were extremely high velocity missiles, hypersonics, like they say, right? And they seem to maneuver as well. So there was maneuvering capability that these missiles or the warheads had. The explosions were rather small, but that is also something that sends a message that these missiles can carry small payloads. Well, that's enough for a nuclear warhead. So yeah, that's how I see it. Now the second question is, will Russia and China come in Iran's defense if Israel attacks Iran? I don't think so. Not directly. Russia will aid Iran in a variety of ways. China will aid Iran in a variety of ways. Russia may sell high quality fighter planes to Iran. Maybe that's already in the way. The Sukhoi, the latest Sukhoi thing, Sukhoi 57, is it? And Iran already has excellent cruise missile and ballistic missile capabilities. Uh, but Russia and Iran has been supplying Russia with those Shahed 2 loitering munitions, drones, and so on. So there's a lot of synergy between the two nations. Even China has invested in Iran. It's invested big time in Iran. They've invested more than $400 billion worth of resources in Iran over a 25-year period. That's a kind of strategic deal they have. So these nations, China and Russia, are significantly invested in Iran. They need Iran to keep existing and remain a strong force in the West Asia region, the subcontinent plus region, because that creates a certain kind of balance of power in the region, and they need that. So they will certainly aid Iran in a variety of ways, but probably not direct involvement, right? China is anyway geographically too far away to be directly involved in any conflict that involves Iran. Russia is nearby. Let's go back to the map and I'll show you how it is so. How is Russia nearby when it comes to Iran? Excuse me. So if you go north of Iran, you have the Caspian Sea, and well, to the west, in the western part of the Caspian Sea, you already have the Caucasus region, the cities of the cities of Chechnya, Dagestan, etc., and so on. So Russia is right there. Russia is very much in the neighborhood. So Russia could get involved directly if it so desires. But one hopes that it doesn't come to all that. One hopes there isn't a war, because war is terrible for everybody concerned, including nations that aren't involved directly in the war, like India. If there's a war in the region, you're gonna see oil prices shooting up, and that's bad for our economy. So there we have it. So that's kind of the question, the answer to your questions. Good question, and let's see what else is going on. Cinephile takes us in a whole different direction. How was Usain Bolt so fast compared to other top sprinters? Couldn't be just genetics which made him the best. Can his 100-meter world record ever be broken? Look, a lot has to do with genetics. Most people simply can't imagine running at anything close to that speed that Usain Bolt was able to accomplish. And of course, Usain Bolt trained incredibly hard, tremendously hard training, a tremendous work ethic. I've seen some of his training videos. I mean, the things that he put himself through to get into that shape, not easy. If you're a lifter in gym and you know what leg day is, then you know that if you really push hard in your leg on leg day, your stomach is going to give way and you're going to have to throw up in a bucket, right? Usain Bolt used to throw up regularly because every day was leg day for him, right? Leg sprinting and whatnot. My goodness, the work ethic was incredible, and obviously, work ethic. You may have the greatest work ethic, but without genetics, you won't be able to reach the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. So I think it's something to do with tremendous genetics plus an incredible work ethic. That the combination of those two is what made him the greatest that we have ever seen thus far. Will his world record ever be broken? Probably someday it will be broken. Probably someday we will discover somebody with even better genetics. I remember when when I was a little kid, 1988 Olympics, Seoul, uh, the Canadian sprinter Ben Johnson set a world record. The next day, he was caught doping, and he was stripped of his medals. The world record was erased. But I thought that it was at, I think it was 9.86 or something. I thought nobody can break that as a kid. So you're really naive. But here we are now. What's the world record currently? 9.5 something. Well, you can see how much of a change there's been. So I think it will eventually be broken, but only a new legend can break that record, I would say. So yeah. Okay. Dr. Atul says, does dentistry have good opportunity in India? Is it better to work abroad than to set up a clinic in India? Well, look, we have the world's largest population. Our dietary habits are changing. Indians eat a lot of junk food these days. Indians have adopted the American kind of diet, which causes a tremendous amount of dental problems, cavities, caries, dental caries, and whatnot. So I think there's always going to be a market for a huge uh, target audience, let's say, for dentists in India. You're gonna see that. I mean, especially kids. I mean, their dental hygiene habits aren't that good anymore. The kind of stuff they eat. So I think, look, dentistry. So it's very clear that dentistry. If you're a dentist, you're gonna always have good opportunities. You're gonna always have customers in India. The question is, can you make the kind of money in India as a dentist as you could do, let's say, in the West somewhere or in any first world country? Probably not. Uh, so if you're a really good dentist, highly skilled, maybe it makes sense if you want to get rich. Who doesn't? To perhaps go abroad. I always tell people if you have the opportunity to go abroad and get wealthy, please do so. No question about it. So yeah, uh, dentistry. You will never be unemployed as a dentist in India. You will always have clients as long as you're competent, right? But you won't get as rich in India doing the same work as you could get if you were, let's say, in a Western country or a first world country. And that's the long and the short of the answer. Okay. Shomik Sahu says, thank you. Recently, the Israelis did a cyber attack on Iran, and also the Internet Archive website was hacked. I heard about that, yes. How should India be prepared for cyber warfare? We should have adequate offensive as well as defensive capabilities, right? That's how India should prepare. And it's not something you can develop overnight. Let's say you're a nation that doesn't have any capability in this particular domain, cyber warfare. Well, it's going to take you, first of all, you're going to have to identify a whole bunch of talented programmers and penetration hacking experts, and the whole gamut. You're going to have to identify a bunch of people. You're going to have to test them. Especially, you would want to identify young kids as in teenagers and college students who are really good at this. It takes time to develop the capabilities. It may take you at least 5 to 10 years to get decent at this. So, look, we don't know what India's cyber warfare capabilities are. We don't speak about that. Obviously, if you have capabilities, you will not advertise those. I am pretty sure India is reasonably well equipped when it comes to these capabilities. I think India is one of the top nations in when it comes to cyber warfare capabilities, offense as well as defense. So, how should India prepare for this? India should be aware of the current threat scenario. What are the current threats? What are the current attacks that are happening wherever in the world? Who is conducting these attacks? You should know who's doing that. What are the techniques they're using? What How are they, how are they doing it? You got to always stay ahead of the curve. Um, and yeah, it's just like any war. You can't. Sometimes you get hit, no matter how good you are. So you've got to develop these capabilities and keep on improving them. And you have to hire the best, identify and hire the best talent. So I think India, hopefully, is doing this. Okay, we haven't advertised any of that, which we obviously shouldn't. That yes, the Israelis did a cyber attack on Iran, and it's very surprising. The Internet Archive website has been hacked. I'm not sure if it's still on. Right? Is it back on? I'd be very disappointed if it goes down. It's a great resource, and I don't understand why that website needs to be targeted by whoever has done that. But well, such is the world. So I think India is reasonably. I believe India is pretty well equipped when it comes to cyber warfare capabilities, and obviously they will know how to handle this better than us. Okay. Okay, feminist slayer says, I was showing slight aggression in pursuing my goals. I didn't harm anyone, but a girl in my study group accused me of showing toxic masculinity. Isn't assertiveness a natural trait in guys? You see, this entire feminist thing, the feminist worldview, feminist ideology, is now making its way into India. It's been doing so for the past at least 2 decades, and now just being who you are as a male is seen as toxic masculinity. Look, if there's a girl in your study group is accusing you of doing this, I think you need to change study groups. That's what I would say. And I would request our female brethren, sister, and whatever it is, look, I mean, males are males. As long as someone's not being aggressive towards you, just leave them alone, right? Anyway, that's something we're going to be dealing with in increasingly in the coming years. Because look, the world's most powerful nation, the world's most influential nation, the world's most important nation, the United States, is exporting all of this. So there's nothing we can do about it, unless you create a firewall like the Chinese have, right? And you don't want to be isolated from the rest of the world, right? The Chinese have done a pretty good job of selectively allowing their citizens to access websites and all that. But well, probably India is not capable of doing that or won't even want to do that. So my point is, look, if someone's behaving in this manner towards you, or accusing you of toxic masculinity, I think there's no point fighting with such people. You need to change your study group and find better people. Okay, that's what I would say. Okay. Ritik Pangal says, have I read any religious books? I have read plenty of religious books. I have. Mostly books that deal with my religion, but also curiously, I've been curious enough to venture beyond my religion and just to get a sense of what the others are talking about. So, yes, I have read religious books. I have. McLuhan says India and the US have signed a deal to manufacture semiconductor fabrication plant. Is it safe to join hands with the US in such an important industry? Uh, it's a good question, sir. Uh, Ideally, you want to go it alone. Ideally, you should do it on your own. It'll take you 20 years perhaps to reach where you want to reach, but so what? So what? Uh, for some reason, there's a significant amount of closeness between India and the US. I have nothing against the US, but we know that the US sees India as a long-term threat and a rival. Long-term, not today. Today, India is insignificant. Today, India is like a grasshopper on the grass. Okay, in 20 years, India could be the next China if India continues along the same trajectory that it's on right now. By by a 2050 horizon, India could be a genuine competitor for the US. So the US doesn't want that to happen. So and India has, India is greatly penetrated, let's say, by the US. And this penetration began in the early 90s after the downing of the Iron Curtain, and that's when Indian politicians needed new daddies. And that's where the infiltration of India began, especially after the economic reforms of the early 90s, and so on. So India is deeply penetrated. The superpower has assets all over the place within India, in every institution, in every political party, one would imagine. So it's not that surprising that the Americans are involved in all these things. I think it kind of, to some extent, compromises the country. Yeah, but yeah, that's where you are today. I mean, you have. Uh, I remember Google provides Wi-Fi to Indians in various railway stations in India. We have allowed Google to do that free Wi-Fi. I mean, if you want to save a few bucks, just to save a few bucks, you inviting Google to provide Wi-Fi. They're going to collect all the information, all the data of every single person who passes through the railway station. But there you have it. So I think we have these rather bizarre policies. The government, I think clearly the people who run the government are way more intelligent than somebody like me, so probably they know better. But I think it's rather, one has to be more careful than what we are being right now. Okay, Samarth says, how do I send a question to Abhijit, sir? Sir, you just sent a question, I took it. This is how you send questions. If you have a question in your mind, you just put it up over here in the live chat, and if I I happen to see it, I'll pick it up if it's interesting enough. So please ask good questions. Ayush Pandey says, my views on the recent Starship launch. Do I consider it successful or partially successful? This happened a couple of hours ago, 2, 3 hours ago. The Starship is the most powerful rocket ever built. It's more powerful than the Saturn V rocket that was built by what's his name? I forget the name. Uh, Not Werner Heisenberg, but Werner von Braun, the German rocket scientist who later became American. So he built the Saturn V rocket in the 1960s, the rocket that took the first humans to the moon's surface, and brought them back. Oh, well, the rocket didn't bring them back, but you get the point. Now, the Starship that Elon Musk is building, is developing currently, SpaceX, with SpaceX, which is his company. Starship is the most powerful rocket humanity has ever built. And the latest launch happened just like 2, 3 hours before, right this moment. So the rocket took off. I haven't seen the details of the whether it went into orbit or not. I know that the rocket took off successfully. I know that probably the rocket itself touched down on one of those ships, at sea, and it touched down successfully. It's not been lost. It's not been destroyed. It touched down, and it's going to be brought back to the facilities. And the booster also came back, and it was actually captured by that gigantic clamp on that launch pad. So the booster also came back, and in a very precise way, it was captured by the two clamps. So it's an incredible success. It's not partially successful; it's successful beyond your wildest imagination. So I think uh, Starship is almost ready. I'm sure they're going to test it a couple more times before sending it on an official mission. But there we have it. I mean, it's incredible progress that SpaceX is doing. In 2017, you had the first rudimentary Starship that was tested by SpaceX. It was a very makeshift kind of contraption, and in just 7 years, they've successfully achieved what they achieved today. It's incredible. The pace at which the progress and development is happening is incredible. Compare that with ISRO. What has changed in ISRO in the past 7 years? Almost nothing. A little bit. You may have whatever the new rocket is called. It's slightly more powerful than the one we had earlier. I mean, it's incremental progress we are doing in ISRO. I'm not blaming the scientists at ISRO, the engineers in ISRO. I'm not blaming the head of ISRO. They can only do what they're allowed to do, what they're ordered to do. But there's no ambition. Why aren't we developing reusable rocket technology? Why aren't we thinking out of the box and doing something even SpaceX hasn't thought of? Why aren't we doing something different? We just following, copying in a small way with a tiny budget. How many launches does ISRO do every year? What, four, five? It's simply staggering the lack of ambition our leaders have in the field of science and other fields as well. So I think the US is now way ahead of the rest of the world. What SpaceX is achieving is monumental. I would like to congratulate Elon Musk officially. Elon, if you're watching, congratulations. You're doing tremendously well, and in a few years, probably by 2030 or maybe by 2035, you're gonna have humans on Mars. I think in 2 3 years, whenever the next launch window opens up, you have a launch video every, I don't know, 26 months or something. If, you can look it up for Mars. Every few months, 26 or whatever months, you have a launch window that opens up for sending a spacecraft to Mars, which is the optimum amount of travel that you do, least amount of travel in the shortest amount of time. So whenever that opens up next, I'm sure they're gonna send a couple of, at least one Starship to Mars as a or a test mission. And I think in a few years you're gonna have the first humans that will be sent to Mars. So I think there's tremendous progress that's happening, and SpaceX is showing the world what can be done. So yeah, great to see that. And sad that we have nobody with even 1% of that ambition in India. And if people have ambition, they aren't the ones with the money. So that's where we are. Bhumit Joshi says, how does Iran getting nukes affect India? Those nukes aren't for India, but it's always interesting to have a new nuclear weapons power in the neighborhood. So let's take a look at the map. Here is the map. Shall I make it? Yeah, this is better way of looking at it. So here's our neighborhood, the subcontinent plus region. Yes. And we have, I mean, we have India, a nuclear weapons power. North and east of us, we have China, nuclear weapons power. West of us, we have a temporary nation that is temporarily a nuclear weapons power. Then west of Pakistan, we have what is probably another newly minted nuclear weapons power, Iran. This neighborhood, wow, just imagine that. Four nuclear powers in the region. And if you go eastwards, we have North Korea, another nuclear weapons power, and so on. Now, the nukes that Iran is developing aren't meant for India. They are meant for ensuring Iran's defense vis-a-vis Israel. Iran considers Israel to be its number one enemy, apart from Shaitan-e Bozorg, like they say, the United States. Um, and having nuclear weapons ensures a significant amount of it is a deterrent, isn't it? Any nation would think twice, thrice, 100 times before attacking a nation that has nuclear weapons and the ability to deliver the nuclear weapons. And Iran certainly has the ability to deliver nuclear weapons. It has excellent missiles, as they've demonstrated multiple times. So it kind of changes the balance of power in the region. Iran becomes a different kind of entity now. Its hard power score changes, increases, not decreases. It has an effect on Pakistan. Pakistan is a nuclear weapons power. They always say that we are the Islamic, we have the Islamic bomb. We are the only Islamic nation to have a nuclear weapons program. Well, that no longer works. Now Iran too has that. So Pakistan also can't bully Iran. I mean, they've never tried significantly bullying Iran, but Iran and Pakistan aren't ever the best of friends, unless you go back to the 1960s, which was a different story. So they're kind of geopolitical rivals, Iran and Pakistan, not on the best of terms ever. So now that introduces a whole different dimension in that relationship, bilateral relationship, Iran Pakistan. But overall, it means that the Iran Israel dynamic changes a lot now. Israel will have to be really careful. It can't if Israel had harbored hopes of, let's say, uh, destroying Iran capabilities, military capabilities, through a barrage of missile strikes or airstrikes and all. Now that is a little, they'll have to think 100 times before they do that, and so on. So the whole relationship has changed, the whole dynamic has changed. Iran has demonstrated that it can rain down missiles and strike targets within Israel, despite Israel having the Iron Dome system. A lot changes. For India, I don't think a lot changes vis-a-vis Iran. We don't have any overall problems with Iran. We are working together with Iran in a variety of ways. The Chabahar project is a great example of that. So overall, we are kind of on good terms, India and Iran. Of course, the American sanctions have kind of strained the relationship. Iran would have wanted India to buy a lot of oil from them because they're right next door. Why should we not? But the Americans have kind of prevented India from doing that, and that's kind of the US factor has kind of strained the relationship between India and Iran to some extent. But we aren't rivals in any shape or form whatsoever. So Iran getting nukes, it changes the balance of power in the region to a certain extent. It makes Iran harder to destroy if you are an adversary of Iran. For India, what does it mean? It doesn't set off any alarm bells in India for sure, not at all. Of course, we will now have to calculate things differently when it comes to the region. Uh, but overall, it's not a bad thing as far as we in India are concerned. Excuse me, I've got a cold. But yeah, it's something we have to think about. It's certainly something we have to think about. It changes the balance of power, the dynamics in the region. It complicates matters in our neighborhood for sure. But it's not a threat for India. But we still have to look at it differently. Yeah, it's complicated matter, complicated, definitely. Okay, okay. Naman Panchal says, which is the most dangerous security threat at the Red Sea? The Houthis or the Somali pirates? Describe in the detail. Okay, so let's see where the Red Sea is. The Red Sea, it connects. Well, it's this stretch of ocean that exists between the Arabian Peninsula and Africa. It begins when where the Gulf of Aden ends at the Strait of Bab al Mandeb, and it terminates in Suez, Al Suez, or wherever. Yeah, Al Suez, which is where the Suez Canal begins, which connects the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea. Now, the question is, which is the most dangerous security threat in this overall region? So, of course, we have Djibouti, which is at the commencement, let's say, of the Red Sea, and east of Djibouti we have Somalia, right? And Somalia is a nation that is strife torn. Very little governance exists there, and you have these pirates, warlords, and pirates that run the roost in Somalia. Sadly, which is a tragedy for the nation, but it is what it is. And I'll not go into the historical roots of that particular situation. So, one threat for shipping is the Somali pirates, and these Somali pirates aren't high tech pirates. They don't have the best technology. They usually have AK-47s and uh, grenade launchers, rocket launchers, that sort of thing. Reasonably rudimentary technology. They have speedboats and so on, and they have numbers, and they have been terrorizing shipping in the region for quite a while, quite a number of years, right? And then you have the Houthis, the Ansar Allah faction in Yemen, uh, which is an anti-West faction. Well, you can't blame them for what they are. They have been targeted by the West for so long. A war essentially has been raging in Yemen since the 1960s, 70s, and Yemen has been devastated by that. And well, can one blame the people of Yemen for trying to fight that? So, anyway, if you want to understand the Yemen situation, there is a video, a podcast on this channel. It's with Dr. Isa Bloomy, in which he speaks about, in which he goes into this matter in great detail. If you are interested, you can check out that particular podcast. It's from a couple of years ago, roughly. So there you have that. Now, the Houthis, they are allies of Iran, and they have access to certain Iranian technologies. They seem to have cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. Well, that makes the Houthis way more dangerous if you are their enemy than the Somali pirates. The Somali pirates don't have any such advanced technology. They don't have missiles. They have rocket launchers at best. So that's why I would say, I hope I'm able to justify this, that I'm sure you understand that AK-47s and rocket launchers and grenade launchers on one side, on the other side you have ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. This is a way more dangerous technology. So the Houthis are more dangerous security threat if you are an adversary. If you are India, they will not bother you because we aren't their enemy. But yeah, the Houthis are way more powerful than the Somali pirates. Okay. Um, let's see what else. Alpha says, will India have Sindh and Punjab? Look, that's the same old question, isn't it? When does it's about POK, it's about Pakistan and so on. Be patient. Look, we are a 10,000-year-old civilization at least. A few years here and there, what's the big deal? We will have it back, right? But the question is, do we want those people along with the package, along with the land? The land is ours, obviously. It's our ancestral land, it's our sacred land. It's in the Punjab, all of that, even Gandhar, I would say, uh, Balochistan, etc. But it will eventually happen. Look, Pakistan is an artificial nation. It's a temporary nation. It is propped up by foreign powers who, uh, and the utility that Pakistan has for them is that it serves a certain geopolitical agenda, counterbalancing India, of being a nuisance for India, and so on. So that's why they need Pakistan over there. As long as this need exists, Pakistan will be made to exist. It will be propped up, and they'll ensure that nothing happens. When they no longer need Pakistan, whenever that happens, Pakistan will spontaneously disintegrate. Then the question is, do we want to have the rest of Punjab back within India, and do we want Sindh back in India? The problem is the population is extremely highly radicalized and they hate us. They are the same blood as us. They have the same ancestors as us. There are people, but they hate us. Okay, religious factors or whatever factors. I don't have to go into the detail. I think we all understand that. Do we want that population? Do we want to have them within our borders? Can we live with those people? Is the question. Most of them hate us, right? So I think it's going to take time. Eventually, the subcontinent will reunify. Eventually, but that may take 100 years. Maybe it's 100-year project. It's not going to happen. Even if it's available tomorrow, do you want them, those people within your borders? That's the question you have to ask yourself. I would say no. So not yet. So I would say that eventually, whenever it happens, Pakistan will fragment. It will break up. POK, that will return to India because that doesn't make too much of a difference anyway right now, considering the situation in that region. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa goes back to Afghanistan. Gandhar it merges with Afghanistan. Balochistan probably becomes independent. Sindh probably becomes independent, and Punjabistan or whatever it is becomes independent. And that situation will persist for a few decades, perhaps. And hopefully, at some point in time, if the population becomes de-radicalized and they stop hating their own people, then maybe we can reabsorb them within the fold of Indian civilization. But of course, right now we are just a nation; we're not a civilization officially, right? So I think it's a long story. It's going to be a long project, maybe 100 years project, maybe a 150-year project. But for us, what's 100 years? For us, 100 years is nothing. It's like a weekend. So be patient. Be patient, friends. uh uh Ayush Pandey says, do you consider the attack of Iran with Fatah 2 missile of Mach 15 speed a joke? I mean, with 1 ton payload, it would have kinetic energy equivalent to 3 tons of TNT. Look, if you are impacting at Mach 15 times the speed of sound, look, consider the BrahMos. The BrahMos is a Mach 2 missile, right? And even if you don't put a payload, a warhead on the BrahMos, even if it's not equipped with a warhead, if it impacts a ship, it's gonna just cut the ship in half just because of its kinetic energy. That's how dangerous the BrahMos is at Mach 2. Now, if you have a missile that's hypersonic, um, a hypersonic is Mach 5 plus, right? That's typically a cruise missile. But when you talk about Mach 15, you talk about close to re-entry speeds. That's ballistic missiles. Ballistic missiles, they re-enter the atmosphere at about Mach 20 plus, around Mach 20, and they may impact around Mach 15 or whatever it is, maybe even higher than Mach 15. It's once you are within the atmosphere, your missile is within the atmosphere, you've got I don't know, a bunch of seconds. How much time do you have before you can even think of intercepting the missile? So Mach 15 is not a joke. I mean, why would you consider that to be a joke? That missile will cause devastation even without a payload. And you don't need a 1 ton payload. You can have a 200 kilo uh, conventional payload. It will cause a lot of damage. I think the payloads they sent on those missiles, the Iranians in the latest attack, those seem to be small payloads because because the explosions were rather small. Maybe they were trying to send a different kind of message. So yeah, in case you've done the calculation of kinetic energy and all, I'm not sure 3 tons of TNT is it's decent. I don't think it's a joke. Uh, they could have sent larger payloads on those missiles. It would have changed the velocity profile, etc., of the missiles, and maybe it would have made those missiles slightly easier to intercept, and maybe they wanted to send a certain message. That's why they did it. But it's clearly not a joke. This is not a joke. When you have a ballistic missile incoming at re-entry speeds, roughly in the region of Mach 20, that is not a joke. So yeah. Okay. Brijesh SK says, if Israel destroys nuclear facilities, which are the countries which will get affected by radiation? Uh, Look, I'm assuming you're talking about Iran's nuclear facilities. If Israel successfully, let's say in a hypothetical scenario, were to target Iran's nuclear facilities, and let's say, like you're saying, it destroys those facilities, what's going to happen? You're going to have explosions, right? They'll be targeted through airstrikes or missiles, or sabotage. Three possible scenarios one can envisage. Now, when you have explosions and you have nuclear materials, nuclear fuel, etc., and you have an explosion, that's gonna get vaporized to some extent. It's gonna go out in the atmosphere. So, depending on the amount of nuclear material that is released in the atmosphere and how high it is released, and the wind and climate situation, you could have different outcomes. So I remember when Chernobyl happened, when I was a kid, I was in Europe at the time. There was this cloud of radioactive fallout that was hovering over Europe, and we kids were told not to go and play football in the grass because you could have radiation contamination over there. So that situation persisted for a couple of months or something. uh, Now, in the case of Chernobyl, it was a big explosion and a tremendous amount of nuclear fallout. Nuclear material was spewed into the atmosphere. That's a nuclear reactor, which naturally operates at extremely high temperatures and pressures. And there was a meltdown in that. Now, if you target nuclear facilities where you have stored fuel, you won't have that sort of situation. You will have some fallout into the atmosphere, but not to that extent. So it's an interesting question from a theoretical perspective. I don't think the uh, fallout will be very great. Obviously, it's going to cause some problems, but it won't. Uh, Chernobyl was like a nuclear blast almost, and it went high into the atmosphere. In the case of something like this, it won't probably go very high in the atmosphere. So most likely, the host country will be the one that's affected the most, and even in that case, it may not be a very widespread area. So that's what I would imagine it would be like. I have not actually run the scenarios through proper calculations or anything, but most likely it won't spread far and wide. If look, we're talking about Iran here. I mean, I'm not saying this should happen, okay, but if it happens, probably it will be contained within Iran and the neighboring nations. What are the wind patterns like? I'm not sure, so I don't think it'll go very far, as far as I can see without doing any actual calculations. Shri Hari Nair says, I might have a chance to get into TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Corporation, right? Manufacturing Corporation, as machine learning engineer in Taiwan. How safe is it to relocate there for the next 2 3 years? Well, that's always. I think it should be pretty safe next 2 3 years. I don't think China is going to try anything stupid. I don't think China will try and grab Taiwan. Okay, look, I could be wrong. Okay, I could be wrong. I am not some fortune teller. I cannot see the future. I can only weigh up probabilities. I deal with probabilities. I think the probability of China invading Taiwan and all that happening is pretty low right now. Uh, in the ideal scenario from China's perspective, they walk into Taiwan without any warfare. They get Taiwan untouched, not a broken shell of a country. So I think it should be pretty safe. I don't think we are in that scenario because if China makes a move on Taiwan, it's very close to World War III, because the US will immediately get involved and there's going to be a lot of fighting and all that. Uh, if you have the chance to be there 2 3 years, I think you should go ahead for it. And even if there's a war that breaks out, they will not want to touch civilians uh, or do anything that harms civilians. It makes them look bad. So overall, I don't think it's something you should worry about too much. If you get an opportunity, go grab it. But I say this with a caveat. Look, I'm not a fortune teller, okay? But even if a war happens, like I said, they definitely do not want to touch civilians. So overall, you would be safe. And the Taiwanese have the bunkers and all that in case a war happens. So anyway, so hopefully civilians will anyway be safe. So I think if you get the chance, don't waste it. Go for it. Okay, HS10 says, what is Hawking radiation? Okay, we're going from geopolitics into theoretical physics. And this is theoretical physics. We have never observed this, but let me explain what it is. Hawking radiation, let me tell you very briefly, is something to do with black holes. Black holes are, we think of black holes as giant vacuum cleaners, right? That's the popular depiction of black holes, which is this big black thing that sucks everything in. And once you fall into it, you can never come back, etc. So that's what you typically think of black holes that exist in faraway space. But black holes, they actually have a temperature. Black holes they don't just suck everything in, they even radiate. So that is Hawking radiation. Um, and the larger a black hole, the cooler it is, and the slower is the lesser amount of particles it emits. And the smaller a black hole is, the hotter it is, and the more it radiates. So Hawking radiation is thermal radiation that comes out of black holes. It is because of the temperature of a black hole. Any object that has a temperature, it radiates something, right? The sun has a certain temperature, it radiates so much radiation, light, heat, and solar wind and all that. Similarly, black holes also radiate something called Hawking radiation, which has, if you understand what I'm talking about, it has a black body profile. So that's what Hawking radiation is. It is radiation given off by black holes depending on their temperature. The smaller a black hole is, the more it radiates, the faster it radiates, which tells you that once a black hole reaches a certain size, it's just boom, goes boom and dies. So that's Hawking radiation and Hawking evaporation. Tanay Chandra says, excuse me, has, has Pakistan made a joke out of itself by inviting Zakir Naik as the state guest? And have you seen how we roasted Pakistan? Okay, I haven't seen what has been going on vis-a-vis that person. I don't find the person interesting. I don't find Pakistan overall as a nation or a society interesting. My apologies to any Pakistanis who may be watching. I simply don't find it interesting. Okay. And yeah, I'm aware that the person has been invited to Pakistan. He visited. And I heard that he did not. He kind of. Some people are saying he made a fool of himself. So I don't know the details. I haven't been watching the videos or anything, but I heard something to this effect. And he roasted Pakistan. Well, I don't. I'm not aware of that. Why would you roast your own hosts? That is rather stupid. So I'm not aware. It's not something I like to follow. These things, I'm sure there are lots of YouTubers who follow this sort of thing. Lots of channels who make their whole content about around these matters. It's not something that interests me. So anyway, Pakistan, Zakir Naik, whatever topics that aren't quite for me. Um, okay, Ayush Pandey says, why does Russia need missiles like burevestnik, if it is ballistic missiles like Satan 2 and avangard? You need a whole variety of missiles as a nation. For example, we in India have the BrahMos, and we are working on the BrahMos too. Why don't we have a whole different kind of family of missiles? Wait, we do, don't we? We have a whole assortment of missiles. Some are ballistic missiles, some are short range ballistic missiles, medium range, long range, hyper long range, perhaps ballistic missiles. We have MIRV equipped missiles. We have cruise missiles. We have subsonic cruise missiles. We have supersonic cruise missiles. We may be working on something other sonic cruise missile. We have cruise missiles that deploy torpedoes. We have all kinds of things. You need a whole assortment of different kinds of missiles for different kinds of scenarios. Just because you have a very super powerful big missile doesn't mean that you should not develop anything else. The Satan 2 is an intercontinental ballistic missile. It's extremely large, and it can, I don't know, deploy at least 10 warheads, MARV equipped warheads. They also have other missiles. They have the Kinjal, they have the Zircon, and so on. So you're always developing, you're always trying to improve upon what you have. That is the mark of a nation that takes itself successfully. You don't just develop a missile and then sit down and relax. Okay, come here, done, happy. No, you keep on uh, developing new things. You have to be a little paranoid when it comes to the domain of geopolitics, especially if you are a major power. So that's why Russia does it. It needs a variety of missiles for a variety of different scenarios and purposes. It's like, why do we need to develop other aircraft when we have the Tejas Mark 1, Mark 2, whatever? Why don't we have strategic bombers? Why don't we have flying wing stealth aircraft? Why don't we have stealth bombers? Why don't we have unmanned fighter planes? Why don't we have twin engine fighter planes? Why don't we? I mean, I could go on. Same thing applies to missiles. So you should have an assortment of different kinds of missiles. Ted X77 says, will unemployment problem ever end in India? We don't have very high rates of unemployment. I think the government has done a pretty good job at when it comes to unemployment. Look, in most parts of the country, I know that if you are a graduate, if you have a master's degree or whatever, if you have gone through higher education, it may be really hard to get a job. I am aware of that situation. But as long as you are willing to do work, you probably will get a job of some kind. So I don't think we have much of an unemployment problem in India. The problem is that people want salaries of, I want a salary of 2 lakhs per month. I have an MBA, or I have a master's degree, or I have a bachelor's and a diploma and whatever, and I believe that I am worthy of having a salary of so and so, and I will not accept any job which gives me a lower salary. And then you sit down and say, I'm unemployed. That attitude is a huge problem. There's this big attitude of entitlement that lots of people have. Look, we are a developing country. There are certain constraints in the country. You need to be a contributing member of society. I agree that the education system is garbage, and these degrees that you get are not worth the paper they're printed on in a lot of cases. That's true. But then what do you do with it? You're gonna sit at home and do nothing, and depend on your parents to care for you? That's not how it should work, and it's not sustainable. Eventually you will be on your own. So I think that problem exists, but overall unemployment is not that big of an issue in India. um, and as India's economy grows, I think more and more opportunities will slowly, gradually start opening themselves up for people with even with higher education. So that's how I see it. I think we should not complain too much. Okay, we are, you know, India's GDP per capita was about 2,500. Was about $2,500 in 1947. You know what's India's GDP per capita today? It's $2,500, roughly the same. In between 1947 and 2024, India's GDP per capita went below 800. Thanks to who? I think you know thanks to who, right? So we have just once again attained the position that we had in 1947. So it's like we have just attained independence now, and now we start working. That's where we are. Okay, so if you are in that situation, you're gonna have problems in the economy. It's gonna take time to solve the problems. And I think the current government has done a tremendous amount of work in the past decade to alleviate a lot of things. So, of course, every government has certain problems and certain things they can improve upon, but overall, they've done a great job. So, I think we should not complain so much. We should find whatever opportunities are available and do the best we can with that. Okay. Okay, what else? Okay. McLevin says, why did India never have hats? Even though it's always been so sunny and hot, we had a pagari, but no headwear with a brim. How, that's an interesting question. I think somebody who is into the field of sociology should take this up. Interesting question. Uh, we had pagari. So what does a pagari, a turban, do? It not only kind of keeps the sun away, it also mops up your sweat because India is a hot. India has in the past 2,500 years, 3,000 years had a reasonably hot climate. Before that, India had a cooler climate and a heavier monsoon. But in the past 3,000 years, we've had a reasonably hot climate. Um, yeah, it's a really interesting question you ask. How come we never developed hats with brims? We always had pagaris, that sort of headgear, and only males wear that. Ladies don't wear that, right? I cannot think of any ancient statue or carving of any Indian person, female, of a lady wearing a pagari, right? Interesting, very interesting. Don't think I have the answer to this question. Well, that's not often that it happens, right? So McLevin has asked a very interesting question here, and yeah, I'll have to ponder about it. I'm not able to give you an answer right now. How did that not evolve? And to understand, to kind of go in the direction of understanding the issue and trying to find an answer, a plausible answer to this question, one has to go into the history of hats. So hats is something you have in Europe, right? It's a Western concept of hats with brims. What's the history of hats and caps? That's something you do go into to understand how that particular piece of attire emerged in Western society. If you look at nations like Russia, etc., they also don't really have hats. They used to have these fur caps that are like snug on your head, but they don't quite have brims. Interesting question. So yeah, maybe I'll do some research about this and get back to you maybe in a future episode. Interesting question you asked, sir. I really appreciate that. Okay. Kannan says in Pagri is cheaper and India is very price sensitive. You see, I totally agree. India prices matter a lot in India. People can't afford a lot of money, but historically we were the world's largest economy. So we see things from the perspective of today, maybe last 2 decades, 3 decades. We see things from the lens of post 1947 or post 18th century, post 19th century. But we have to understand India is at least 10,000-year-old civilization. And before the foreigners came and colonized India, India was incredibly prosperous. And prices didn't really matter that much in those days. Okay. We were not living hand to mouth. Our ancestors in, let's say, 1000 AD. 1000 AD, India was the peak of civilization globally. So prices did not matter at the time. We were all prosperous. So yeah, so that it may not quite be the angle along which you would want to investigate this question, but it's a very good question that McLuhan has asked. Ah, okay, Cinephile says, is Rocky the best movie when it comes to ultimate motivation, which gives an incredible message? I'm sure you must have watched it. Why can't India produce such good movies? Of course, I've watched Rocky. I used to have the DVD. I'm sure I have it somewhere, the DVD, and I've watched it a lot of times. Um, Look, is this the ultimate movie when it comes to the ultimate motivation? It depends on who you are and what motivates you. For some people, it may be the greatest movie ever. You want to get motivated, you go and watch Rocky Balboa doing his thing, running in Philly, swallowing those raw eggs and whatnot, and the final battle against Apollo Creed. And yeah, great movie overall. What? Butkus, the name of the dog. Butkus, is it? And his coach, the guy, and his girlfriend Adrian. It's a great movie, no doubt. Okay. Uh, Certainly a great underdog tale, very motivating. What motivates you may not motivate somebody else. So I would say, look, I think it's one of the great movies. I really enjoy it. If you look at it from today's standards, it's kind of a slow movie. I've never had a problem with that, but some people would have. If you ask someone from Gen Z today to watch the movie, they'll say, "Oh, it's so slow. It's such a slow movie." So you'll get that reaction, but it's a great movie. I think I don't really look at movies for motivation. Some people listen to motivational speeches. Some people watch movies for motivation. Some people listen to Eye of the Tiger or some sort of some music for motivation. Some people get motivation from other places. It's up to you. I think it's one of the great movies. I would not say it's one of the greatest top 10 movies of all time, but it's certainly a great movie, and it's a movie I enjoyed a lot. Certainly. Pratik Mehrotra says, is time travel possible? Theoretically, it is kind of possible. Theoretically, it is kind of possible. But practically, to achieve that, you would need engineering that is something only the gods can can come up with. You would need to have an engineering project that spans galaxies. Okay. And then you use the effect. Then you would also need to have a traversable wormhole, Einstein-Rosen bridge. We don't know how to keep the throat of the wormhole open, even if wormholes do exist. We don't not sure about that. And to keep the throat of the wormhole open, to make it a traversable wormhole, you would have to have either something very exotic like negative mass matter, which nobody has ever observed, or something even more exotic like a cosmic string, which is a topological defect in space-time itself that goes back to the birth of the universe itself. Where do we find that? How do we harness that? That thing is going to have ridiculous gravity. It's going to warp everything that comes around it. You don't want to be anywhere near that. But how do you harness that? So theoretically, it's possible. Okay, so if you go from one end of the wormhole to another, and you do certain things, then you may end up at a different time, not just location but time itself. Theoretically possible according to general relativity, but practically more or less impossible unless you are one of the hyper intelligent alien uh, beings that may or may not exist in the universe. So theoretically it's possible. Technically very almost impossible to achieve. Uh, okay, Shri Hari Nair says, what are your views on Ratan Tata? Twitter is divided about this. Should I say no comments? That would be the safe option. What are my views on Ratan Tata? A trustee of Ford Foundation, undoubtedly. It's known. He funded websites like The Wire, significant amount of funding. Um, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Do you know what that is? Do you know what sort of a snake pit it is? Marxist snake pit, anti-India snake pit. Hmm? So I'd rather not go too much into this topic. Is what is best. Okay. My problem with my dear compatriots, my dear Indians, is that you people are so clueless. You people refuse to engage in critical thinking. It's not your fault because you have never been given the luxury of asking questions. So you don't know how to ask questions, even of yourselves. The education system discourages you from asking questions. So you don't ask questions. Even after you're out of the education system, you don't know how to ask questions. You don't know how to think critically. Everything is in front of you. Every piece of information is out there in the public domain, but you will not look at it. And you blindly hero worship people. The problem that we have in India is that we have no great leaders, the great people who who are worthy of being role models. So we look at so we worship fictional characters. We worship actors and actresses. We worship sports people because at least they are able to succeed to some extent. And we worship other nations, and we put those nations' flags in our display, in our profiles on social media. And because if the media put somebody up as on a pedestal as a great person, you just hero worship that person without even looking into the person's activities, which are available in the public domain. So I will. The person has just passed away recently. It's best that I don't speak too much about this, but yeah. So that's as much as I will say today. Okay, please do some, like they say, do some research, do some due diligence. You are all able to use the internet and this technology, which means you are capable of doing that. I know it's hard work to do a Google search. I know it's hard work, but please do a little hard work. Come on. Ah, okay. Maipala Phanendra says, what are your thoughts on Professor C.K. Raju? He upsets the entire Western mathematicians with his research. I like him, is straightforward. What do you think of him? Oh, he's a tremendous guy. You must have seen, I think, the podcast that I released recently with Professor C.K. Raju. Tremendous intellectual, tremendous, an absolute polymath. I mean, he's done research in so many different fields: computer science, computer programming, physics, mathematics, time, history, whatnot. It's an asset to have. We are lucky to have somebody like him in the nation. He's obviously getting elderly now, but I think he has many years ahead of him, and I'm sure he can contribute a whole lot more to the world. If some people get upset by his research, well, that's their problem. It's not his problem. It's not our problem, right? So I think he's a gem of person. Wonderful, wonderful. I'm very fortunate to have met him many times and spent actual time with him. Yeah. Okay, Pradyumna Nitlala says, can we ever make Sanskrit the prominent language equivalent to English and Hindi in India? Sanskrit should be the only civilization language. We should not have Hindi or English. Can we do it? Well, not in the current scenario where our leadership is blind. Someday, when we will have great leaders, not good leaders, but great leaders, it will happen. Right now, not going to happen anytime soon. Very sad, but that's just the case. And I'm done complaining and whining about that. It's just the way the world is. So be it. Someday, look, the true greatness of India will re-emerge. Someday we will have great leaders in the future, genuinely great leaders, not goodish leaders who we think are great. Okay, genuinely great leaders will have, and when those appear, maybe some of them are already born. Who knows? Hopefully, when that happens, Sanskrit will be revived because it is the greatest of languages. And it is the only language that's worthy of being. I should be speaking in Sanskrit, and we should all be able to understand it. That's the ideal situation and scenario, and it should be the language by which India is known throughout the world. Today they think of India as a language, as a nation where you speak Hindi. Hindi is, well, look, I have nothing against any specific language, but Hindi is nothing compared to Sanskrit. Hindi is an upper language. It is a kind of a mongrel language. A lot of uh, loan words that have crept in from our colonizers into Hindi. A tremendous amount of loan words and all. Uh, but yeah, when you have mediocre leaders, you have mediocrity. That's the currency in the country. You see, the 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 standards that you see in a country don't come from the people; they come from the leadership, and the leadership controls everything, right? So even if the people have high standards, but if the leadership imposes mediocrity, mediocre education, mediocre laws, mediocre bureaucracy, mediocre everything on you, then what? How long will you combat it? Eventually, you'll get tired, you'll break, and you'll just go along with the thing. And after several generations, that becomes the norm in the country. And that's where we are today. So it's going to take time, and eventually, I'm pretty sure Sanskrit will re-emerge as the only civilizational language, and some people will be upset with that. Well, I don't care. Okay, Priyojit Mandal says, if there's a war between India and China without any foreign support, then who would win in a modern conflict? I think none will win. Neither will win. Because both are nuclear weapons powers, and if certain red lines are crossed, then certain horrible things will happen, which will destroy both countries. I don't think it makes sense for India and China to go to war. Okay, I don't think India and China should go to war. I don't think any sensible leader would think in that direction. It makes sense for India and China to find ways to work together. So that's how I see it. It's disastrous for two nuclear weapons powers to go to war against each other. Okay. Nishchoy says, what benefit does the US get by the influx of immigrants to Europe? You said in a previous podcast that it's the US doing this, changing demography. Well, you see, Europe historically was the greater power. If you look at the history of the past 500 years, Europe was the driver of everything in the world the past 500 years. The Europeans colonized America. The Europeans created these nations in the Americas, South America, North America, etc. Eventually, the US became independent through its war of independence and all. And they were always worried about Europe becoming too powerful in the Western Hemisphere and in the Americas. They were always worried about that. They came up with something called the Monroe Doctrine, which was about keeping the Europeans away, but they were not really strong enough to enforce that. They had to take the help of the UK to kind of enforce the Monroe Doctrine in the 19th century and all. The main worry was Spain for a very long time, for the US and so on. And in the first half of the 20th century, obviously Germany and Russia became big worries for the US, especially Germany. Even today, I think they when you talk about Germany, they can still see those marching boots and those Hugo Boss uniforms, and they can hear Sieg Heil Victoria in the background. So that is something that they still fear. So how do you end this threat once and for all of the possibility that you may have a resurgent Germany someday in the future? How do you end that? So immigration, obviously. See, the one of the core premises of the Third Reich was the idea of racial purity. They stole the concept of the Arya race from us, from Indians, and they appropriated it, they stole it, and they said that the white people are the true Aryans, and that the Germans are the ideal Aryan people, the superior Übermensch, and so on. We are the superior human race of the humans, and we should rule the world. That sort of thing. That only works when you have racial purity, right? If you have large scale immigration, 20% of your nation's population is immigrants of other ethnicities, and then you have mixing, like what's the term they use, race mixing or whatever, and you have that, and you have a population that's no longer, like they say, racially pure, then the whole idea, the whole premise of the Third Reich or whatever disappears and melts into nothingness. And that's how you ensure that nation is never a threat in the future. And you can do that to other nations, not just Germany. You can do it to various other nations and compromise and hollow them from inside. You bring in immigrants who don't respect the host nation's culture and values, and they want to impose their own foreign culture and values. And they're intolerant. There's strife. There's all kinds of social tensions, and then the immigrant community becomes the dominant community, and it totally destroys the vitality, health, strength, etc. of the host nation. And by doing so, you can render Europe entirely harmless. So that's one possible reason why this may be done. Europe was a big threat for the longest time for the Americans. Perhaps it's that, or perhaps I'm entirely wrong, and maybe the Europeans actually want immigration and they want violent invaders to come in and do all kinds of bad things. I don't know. Yeah. Okay, Swati says Mahrang Baloch arrested. Okay, I wasn't aware. So Mahrang Baloch is this lady who is a dissident. She's of Baloch ethnicity. She's a doctor by profession, and she's one of the prominent voices, Baloch voices, that's speaking up against Pakistani occupation, oppression, etc. in Balochistan, the forced disappearances of people, and all the brutal atrocities that the Pakistani regime, the army, the military is perpetrating on the people of Balochistan. So she is a prominent voice. So okay, I wasn't aware. Like I said, I don't really follow what's happening in Pakistan too much. I'm not interested that much. So she has been arrested. The Pashtun movement has been banned. PTM, PTI, Pakistan Tehreek Insaf is Imran Khan's party. They are protesting. TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, BLA, Balochistan Liberation Army, tribal wars in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Kashmiris unhappy, Shia Sunni issues, IMF loans. Your views, please. Are things bad? Are things worse for Pakistan? Look, like I've always said, I was not aware of the arrest of Mahrang Baloch, but okay, that's news for me. As I've said, there are so many factors and forces within Pakistan that seek to be free from the heavy boot, the oppressive boot of the Pakistani military. There are so many forces within Pakistan that seek to break Pakistan apart, just naturally, spontaneously. It's external forces that have kept Pakistan unified thus far, because Pakistan has a certain kind of utility geopolitically for them, vis-a-vis India, vis-a-vis Iran, vis-a-vis Afghanistan, vis-a-vis the overall area, etc., for a certain kind of geopolitical power balance. Okay, and especially as a counterbalance to India, as a nuisance factor vis-a-vis India, to keep India off balance at all whenever required. So things are bad for Pakistan. Things have always been bad for Pakistan. Pakistan is always two steps from hell, two steps from collapse, two steps from being a failed state. But it's never allowed to become a failed state. It's never allowed to collapse, because it has utility for whoever owns Pakistan right now, whoever pays the bills of the Pakistani military, whoever is putting money in their pockets. Right now, it's the Americans. So yeah, there are all these issues. IMF loans, Pakistan is forever in debt, and they'll be allowed to exist as long as they are of utility. So all these issues, the Balochistan issue, the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa issue, Shia Sunni issues, like you said, Kashmiris are deeply unhappy now in Pakistan. They would like to reunite with India. Tribal wars in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, PTI, democracy has been stifled. There was a coup. Imran Khan has been jailed for I don't know 3 2 3 years. Uh, all that. So things are bad. Things have always been bad for Pakistan the past 20, 30 years. Okay. Um, but yeah, it's gonna keep on existing. It's gonna keep on limping forward. The Pakistani military is gonna keep on getting money from wherever it's getting money, and they're gonna keep on serving that mercenary agenda. So there you have it. Okay, Bangladesh. We haven't spoken about Bangladesh today. That's far. Onabil Abtahi says, what do I think about the Bangladesh situation? Terrible. So Bangladesh is now, as we know, there's been a coup in Bangladesh. Sheikh Hasina has been ousted, and a new puppet regime is now installed in Bangladesh. Mohammed Yunus is a US puppet. We know that very well. Okay, he recently went to the US and kowtowed to his masters and brought out and made revelations that make it very clear that this was a very meticulously planned operation, the whole coup, and met with his masters and so on. And overall, that's what it is. So we have East Pakistan now and West Pakistan. Once again, that's the situation. We have two reasonably hostile neighbors. Pakistan is a fully hostile. Bangladesh also now becomes a hostile power for India. Uh, they're making real rather annoying statements, the Bangladeshis, aren't they? Just to annoy India. And beside that, beyond that, we have a horrible situation in Bangladesh for the Bangladeshi Hindus. They are being targeted. Every day, some new horror story comes out involving civilians, women, girls, Hindus, Hindu temples. Hindus are under attack in Bangladesh. Um, and that's the situation. So it's bad. It's bad. Things are getting worse in Bangladesh if you're a Hindu. That's what I think. And things aren't going to change anytime soon. This is a newly installed puppet government, a newly installed Bangladesh is a newly minted US vassal state. Um, so the situation is bad. It is sad to see that. Sheikh Hasina was doing good work. I don't care what people say about her, that she was undemocratic, dictatorial, whatever. She did a great job with the Bangladeshi economy. She improved relations to a significant extent, the great extent with India. The whole region, the Bengal region, that whole region became more stable. She cracked down on terrorist activities within our nation. Overall, it was good. Now we're gonna have chaos. Bangladesh will go down the same road as Pakistan. So overall, it's bad. Okay. Ayush Pandey says the West always vilifies Russian weapons, but actual case in battleground, Russia seems to be a beast. Look, they destroyed MQ-9 Reaper drone with Sukhoi 27 made in the 1980s. It always makes sense to vilify your opponents and their military capabilities. This is called psychological warfare, propaganda warfare. When I was a kid in the 80s, you always, I lived in the West, okay, a Western country, European country, and it the Russians were portrayed as the masters of propaganda. Everything the Russians do and say is propaganda, propaganda, propaganda. It turns out the West is the master of propaganda. Okay, they take it to a whole different level, and they own the means of production of news and memes, memes, whatever, and they use it to excuse me to tremendous amount of success. So I think Russian weapons are reasonably good. See, the MQ-9 Reaper drone is a subsonic drone that doesn't have anti fighter plane capabilities, anti missile capabilities. So if you have a Sukhoi 27 made in the 80s and you launch a missile, that when the missile locks onto the drone, there's nothing much the drone can do about it. I'm not sure if it can release chaff or flares or whatever. So Russian weapons are robust. They may not be the most high tech weapons, but they are robust. Some of their helicopters are built like tanks. Some of their airplanes are built like tanks, and so on. So I think Russian weapons are reasonably good. You cannot underestimate Russian weapons, and of course, it's good that we Indians we have weapons sourced from Russia, so it's good for us overall. Okay. Um, Kedar says, are North Korea and South Korea going to war? Is Russia involved? Why would they go to war? There's nothing happening in the world right now that suggests anything of the sort right now, right? Is there any are there any tensions in the Korean Peninsula right now? Not that I've heard of. Um, are there any provocative statements made by either side? I not that I've heard of. So there is nothing that indicates that either nation or both nations will be going to war. I don't see any of that happening. So my answer is it doesn't look like that. um, Blazy says, would it have been better if India's population would have been around 400 to 500 million? So go back to 1947. Undivided India's population was about 300 or 300 in the vicinity of 300 million. Undivided India included Pakistan and East and West Pakistan, right? I'm not counting Burma because Burma was partitioned in 1935 or thereabouts. But in 1947, the population of undivided India was about 300 million. That's the right kind of population for a nation the size of undivided India. So, divided India's population would have, the ideal population is around, let's say, 250 to 300 million. In the 1980s, which is not a whole lot of time ago, India's population was about 600 million, less than half of what it is today. Okay? So the population growth has been a disaster for India. But that doesn't mean that we should seek to have a one child policy and as fast as possible bring the population down. That will be a disaster which will end India. Now, the right solution is to gradually bring the population down over a period of 100 or 200 years. Okay? You'll have to do the math to understand why it is so. Because if you have a rapidly declining population, you're going to end up with a very old population. The median age will be in the 60s and 70s. Do you want a population where the average person is 60 years old? That's a disaster for the country. So, the ideal population for a country like India is around 300 million. But it doesn't mean that we do anything drastic. It's going to be a 100 or 200-year project to bring it down gradually to around 300 million. That's the optimum population. Imagine if you have only 300 million people in India. Today it's 1,400 million, right? 1.4 billion. Almost 5 times 300 million. If you had only 300 million people in India, imagine what the roads will look like, what the traffic will look like. There'll be no traffic jams. You have some cities in India like Mumbai, etc., where you have horribly congested trains. People get packed into trains. You won't have that. You won't have all those jams in airports. The whole country will look different. It'll be a much more pleasant country. We just overpopulated. But there's no immediate solution for that. We're going to have to be patient, really patient, and wait for a couple of centuries for the population to slowly come down to 300. But right now, the Indian TFR is dropping, total fertility rate. It's around 2. For a sustained population at the same level, you need a TFR of 2.1. In some states, it's 1.7, 1.6. Bad signs. We don't want population collapse in India. It'll be a disaster. We are already seeing that in China. We're already seeing that in Japan. We're seeing that in various Western nations, European nations. We don't want that here. But also the government will have to be extra vigilant and take the right steps. I'm not sure if they're doing or not doing it. But that's what I can say. Okay, Shri Vatsa says it's a question about physics, theoretical physics. If virtual particle pairs are equal in mass, how does a black hole lose mass if one falls in? How does the escaping particle get enough energy to escape the clutches of extreme gravity? Okay, I'm going to give you a scenario. Completely theoretical scenario and not entirely accurate that this is how it happens. But imagine this situation, okay? It's not entirely accurate. But it's a good analogy to give you to kind of understand how it happens. You have a black hole, okay? Whatever size it is, a black hole of mass m. It has a horizon, which is called the event horizon. That is the boundary of no return. So here is the black hole center. Here is the black hole. And if you cross the event horizon, then you will never return. So let's say you are right at the boundary of no return. And because of the incredible gravitational strength of the black hole, or not because of it, just randomly a virtual particle antiparticle pair is formed. See, space isn't empty. Quantum field theory tells us space isn't empty. It's teeming with these virtual particle antiparticle pairs that don't quite break the laws of physics. They obey Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, the time version, not the energy version, the time version. So you have a particle antiparticle pair that is formed spontaneously and it's going to collapse again, and nothing will be changed in the universe. But this particle antiparticle pair, it has been formed because of the gravity of the black hole. So the energy bill of the formation of the particle antiparticle pair is footed by the black hole. Okay, so some of the black hole's energy, mass energy, is converted into a particle antiparticle pair, which in regular circumstances would once again merge together and nothing will happen and the black hole loses nothing. But because this happened at the event horizon, one particle goes into the black hole and another one escapes. So this virtual particle antiparticle pair becomes a real particle antiparticle pair, because one is lost inside the black hole and one goes outside. And because the mass energy bill was footed by the black hole shrinks in mass. That's what happens. That's kind of how you can see it. It's a very rough and rather imprecise analogy, but that's how it happens. That's how we can think of it happening. So the particle pairs are obviously both the particles are equal in mass, but they have opposite signs, right? Particle antiparticle, opposite quantum numbers. So that's how the black hole loses mass when one falls in. It would not lose mass if both fell in, but one escapes, and that mass was actually the mass of the black hole. So that's what happens, all right? And that's the phenomenon of Hawking radiation. The black holes appear to radiate, radiation coming out, and the radiation exhibits a black body spectrum, completely random. So that's how a black hole seems to have temperature and radiation, and that's how it loses mass. Black hole evaporation, Hawking temperature, and Hawking radiation. That's how it happens. All right. Okay. Okay, Cool Gamer says, do there exist different uncertainty principles in the universe apart from Heisenberg's? Have you ever observed another phenomena where it's impossible to measure two quantities simultaneously? Not that I can think of off the top of my head. There is only at the quantum, when it comes to the quantum world, there's only one uncertainty principle, which is Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And yeah, that kind of imposes a limit onto the precision of our measurements. There's no other uncertainty principle that I am aware of. Ayush Pandey says the Sukhoi 27 dumped fuel on MQ-9 Ripper drone and crashed it. Yeah, I remember seeing that video. How does fuel crash a drone? But that's what it seemed to be like. I do remember that video. That's in the beginning of the war, right? Near the Crimea region. The Death Hunter says, do you see Bangladesh splitting up in the future where Modi steps in to end the atrocities against minorities? I would say let Mr. Modi first step in and end atrocities against Hindus in India. I don't see Mr. Modi stepping in when it comes to Bangladesh. I don't see that happening. It doesn't mean that Mr. Modi is weak or India is weak or anything. It's just the way it is. India is a non-interventionist power. India doesn't intervene. So the minorities in Bangladesh have been left to their own devices. Whatever happens will happen. Not India's problem. Bangladesh is a separate nation, right? That's how the government of India deals with things. So I would be extraordinarily surprised in a pleasant way if Mr. Modi actually intervenes. I don't see that happening. And even if if that doesn't happen, then how does Bangladesh split up? So yeah, I don't see that happening, unfortunately. Okay, Manan Panchal says, if communism is that bad, how did the Soviet Union, Soviet Empire remain so successful despite following that ideology? Dear friend, dear sir, the Soviet Empire broke up. It disintegrated. Yes. And why did it disintegrate? So many factors that caused this. It's not one factor that caused it. So many factors caused it. One of the factors was decline in standards. Over time, more and more decline in standards. Because of what? Communism. Everything. The Soviets initially had extremely good supercomputers. If you go back to the extremely good computers and supercomputers, you go back to the 50s, you have that situation. By the 1960s, the Soviets were like 2 or 3 years behind the US in computing. By the 70s, the Soviets were 5, 6, 7 years behind the US. By the 80s, the Soviets were at least a decade behind the US. Slowly, gradually declining standards in computing and in every other thing. Okay? There were all kinds of limitations and restrictions imposed on the citizens of the USSR, which you would not have in the West. There was collectivization, as we know, and so on. So communism, to a large extent, contributed to a lot of the various factors that are all exhibitions of declining standards that eventually caused the collapse of the USSR. Communism is bad. The Soviet Union is an example of how communism is bad. So please understand. See, you seem to have, and I don't blame you for this, you seem to have the impression that communism is what contributed to the existence of the USSR for a certain amount of time. But it broke up, it collapsed, it was a disaster. You have to study history to understand this. How much of a disaster it was for the people of the USSR. They lost everything. All their wealth was held collectively in the coffers of the USSR. After the collapse of the USSR, all that wealth was distributed to a number of oligarchs who destroyed the wealth, who ruined who ruined Russia. That's why Russia, you had queues for soup in the 1990s. All the wealth, all the savings of the people of the USSR over or whatever number of decades were thrown down the drain. This happened because of the collapse. The collapse happened because of communism and its declining standards. So we are not taught any of this. So I don't blame people for having these ideas and opinions, but you have to educate yourself. If this is something that interests you, please read up on this. Many good books about this. And many books don't speak about this, but you have to educate yourself to understand that it's communism to a very large extent that caused this. All right. Vishak Nair says, what are your predictions on the upcoming US elections? What are its effects on India? Um, excuse me. Right now, you will notice that the Americans, the US government, the US as a nation, is kind of going after India. It's arm twisting India in a lot of ways. It's rather harsh and hostile towards India in so many different ways. You can see signs and symptoms of this all over the place. The kind of op-eds that publications put out regarding India, the kind of think tank articles that come out, the coup in Bangladesh, that is an anti-India coup. The coup in Pakistan also. Do you know there was a coup in Pakistan in 2022? Imran Khan's ouster. And so much more. A tremendous amount of hostility towards India. So when did this all begin? When did things start going bad between India and the USA? It was 2019, 2020. 2020 onwards. What happened in 2020? Trump lost. And Biden won. The Democrats came to power. And the Democrats have historically been way more anti-India than the Republicans. Okay? So it does affect India. To a certain extent, at least. When Trump was in power, he was rather warm towards India. He had his own way of dealing with things, but the situation wasn't bad. So, what do I think is going to happen in the US elections? Look, I am not a psephologist. I am not some election expert, whatever. I look at geopolitics. I look at how a nation is run, and whoever runs the US, clearly it's not Joe Biden or Kamala Harris. Somebody is running the US, whatever you want to call it, the blob, the deep state, the establishment, whatever, right? Um, they see Trump as an outsider. They see 2016, which is Trump's victory, as a big mistake. And in 2020, they rectified the mistake and ensured that Trump does not win. By hook or by crook, they ensure it. Okay, let's keep it at that. And right now, it does appear that Trump is the more popular among the two candidates. It's Trump versus Kamala Harris, right? Kamala is doesn't seem to be as popular as Trump. Even if you look at the various the ratings and whatnot, I think Trump's leading, right? At least some of them show that Trump is leading. So overall, it would look like Trump should probably win, but I think it's difficult for that to happen. I think it's unlikely that Trump will win unless Trump has kissed the ring and done some kind of backroom deal with the powers that be. So overall, I think it's unlikely that Trump will win, unless he has kissed the ring. Is it possible that he may have kissed the ring? It's possible. Well, in that case, things won't change much even if he comes to power. You can see that lots of prominent people are supporting Trump. You can see Elon Musk is all in on Trump. He's taken his whole he's officially endorsed Trump, and he doesn't waste an opportunity to promote Trump and support his campaign. He even appeared on one of his election rallies, right? Elon Musk jumped around and all that. So all that does matter. Uh, but I still think it's difficult for Trump to win. I think Kamala Harris may be the next president. I would be much more happy to see Trump win because first of all, he's very entertaining. Okay, it makes the world a more interesting place, and probably is better for the U.S. The U.S. used to be a great country. It was something that everybody looked up to. The US is still the most important nation in the world, the most powerful nation in the world. And if that is the most important, powerful nation, it's good if it's a nation with high standards, not a nation in decline. So I think overall, Trump will be better for the US than Kamala Harris. But who am I to say all that? I am an outsider. The people of the US will decide what happens if they actually are the ones who decide. Trump says that 2020 was stolen, a stolen election, which means a rigged election. So there are very serious allegations out there. So all of that is the context in which we are having this discussion. I think it's difficult for Trump to win. I think they'll ensure he doesn't win unless he has made some kind of secret agreement with the powers that be. In which case, whether Trump wins or Kamala wins, you won't see much of a difference in US foreign policy and all that. Maybe if Trump wins, it will be slightly better for India. If Kamala wins, it's gonna get worse for India. So that's how I see it. I can't really make predictions, but I think it's difficult for Trump to win. It's less likely that Trump will win. I'll be happy to be proven wrong. Okay. Brijesh says, will the US election be cancelled if the US goes to war with China before elections? No. Even if the US goes to war with China, it's China is nothing compared to the US. The US is way too powerful for China. Just think about it. We haven't used the map too much today. Think about it. Okay, this is China here. We're looking at China. And you have this small island off the coast of China called Taiwan. It is right in China's backyard. The US is so powerful, China can't even take this island, which is right off its coast. That is how powerful the US is. China is no match for the US. If the US and China go to war, the US can squash China like a bug. No offense to the Chinese. I have a great amount of respect for China, for everything they've achieved. But they are no match for the US. The US is just way too powerful. The US is the most powerful today as it has ever been. So I don't see the US and China going to war. China is not stupid. They do want to continue existing, don't they? So such a scenario won't happen. Okay, let's see some other interesting. Okay, Jasmine Raj Singh says, please revive the Indian Interest podcast. I'm gonna start something new next month. It won't be the Indian Interest, but I hope it's gonna be something that will be of interest to you. It's gonna be a big project, starting soon. My opinion about iPhone factory in Tamil Nadu caught fire. Shouldn't we step up our safety standards to avoid such incidents as it affects future investments? So I haven't really looked into this in any detail, but it's unfortunate this thing happened. It sends a bad signal to the investors who want to invest in the country and those who already invested. We have to take care of the foreign companies that invest in India. Um, so I'm not sure what was the cause of this, but it sends a bad signal. That's my opinion about this. We should ensure such incidents do not happen. Finally, somebody talks about this. Advait says recently UK has agreed to hand over sovereignty of the long contested Chagos Islands to Mauritius. You didn't mention Mauritius here, sir. Okay, so the Chagos Islands, the sovereignty is gonna go to Mauritius. Will it include Diego Garcia? Yes, it will include Diego Garcia. What are my views about this? My views about this is that it's a joke. It's just in namesake. It's a namesake thing. The UK will still continue to own and operate Diego Garcia. Technically, the sovereignty will reside with Mauritius. Technically. But in the real world, nothing will change. In the UK, I think they will take the island on lease or something for 99 or so years to begin with. So nothing changes. The UK still will continue to operate and control Diego Garcia. And the UK also is only in namesake. It's only in name. It's actually the US that's controlling and operating Diego Garcia. Nothing changes. And you know what? Go to the map. See, this is what Chagos is, okay? Compared to where India is. Now, this is an island. It's a naval base, Air Force base that allows the US to project a tremendous amount of power in this region. And it's not such a bad thing for India because it kind of keeps China away. So overall, it's okay for India. So that's how I see it. It's not really much of a change. Technically, the sovereignty goes back to Mauritius, but in the real world scenario, nothing changes. Diego Garcia still remains with the US, and overall, it's not so bad for India. So there you have it. Nothing really changes, but on paper, things change. Like on paper today, Article 370 has been removed from Jammu and Kashmir on paper, but on the ground, has anything changed? Have the Kashmiri Pandits been allowed to go back to Jammu and Kashmir, the Kashmir Valley? Nothing has changed. So the change has happened on paper, not in the real world, not on the ground. Similarly, this Diego Garcia thing, Chagos sovereignty, change has happened on paper. Nothing has changed on the ground. There you have it. Grim Sobad says Manipur action when? Modi attended ASEAN summit, something cooking. Something has been cooking, or something or the other has been cooking forever. Manipur action when? I have no idea. I don't see any point talking about Manipur. Manipur action when? I have no idea. Manipur is a disaster. That's what I will say. Manipur is a disaster. Skanda Gupta says, why does India always punch below her weight, geopolitically inactive, when tiny nations like France, Israel, UK, even Iran punch above their weight and always active? Is it due to lack of political will or lack of capacity? What is political will? It's the will of the leader, right? when Modi came to power in 2014, the whole world was watching India. What is this guy going to do, right? Because everybody knows what a nation the size of India can actually do if it chooses to do something. It can shake up the whole world. But now look at India. Where are we? We do nothing. We can do a regime change right in our backyard. India will do nothing. We can unleash mayhem, genocide on Hindus in Bangladesh, India will do nothing. Look the other way. So it's about leadership. It's about leadership, leadership, leadership. Your name is Skanda Gupta. Skanda Gupta, the Hun slayer. If Skanda Gupta was in charge of India today, you think India would behave the same way? It would be a whole different India. One of our greatest emperors. His entire career was an extended military campaign. He was a good man. He made India a much better place. So it's all about leadership. Um, we haven't had great leaders. We haven't been fortunate enough to see the emergence of great leaders the past few hundred years. The last great leader I can think of was Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Before him, one can think of Rajendra Chola and his dad, Rajaraj Chola, right? We had a few good leaders during the freedom struggle, people like Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, but what happened? We know what happened, right? Couldn't do much, unfortunately. So it is circumstances also that define a leader. You may be a great leader with a tremendous amount of ability, but you are in charge of a small nation and you have enemies that are too powerful. You may not be able to do anything, or you may end up being like Genghis Khan, who destroys all his enemies. So at the end of the day, it's all about leadership. The performance of a nation is entirely um, due to the kind of leadership it has. We haven't had great leaders for a very long time. And I said earlier, right? We in India, the people of India are starved of greatness. There's not a single role model on the horizon who exudes true greatness. There's just mediocrity around, right? And that's why Indians worship other nations. You'll see so many Indians putting Israeli flags on their profile on social media. Why? Because they admire Israel. Israel does what India doesn't dare to do. It's not because India isn't strong or India is not great. It's because our leadership isn't great. Right? Leadership matters. Leadership is what makes or breaks a nation. So if India is always punching below its weight, if India is always geopolitically inactive, and so on, I think you should take a look at what your leaders are doing. What is the quality of the leaders that you have and have had in the past? Okay. Surya that says any self-help book suggestions. Ah, I don't self-help. I would rather refrain from giving self-help book suggestions. I have read my share of self-help books. Has any of them helped me really? Not much. So I don't know. Uh, I can't think of any off the top of my head. Uh, if I can think of some good books, self-help books, then I'll let you know in the future. But right now, I can't think of any. Sorry about that. Sorry. Apologies. Um, Kuldeep says recently 6 languages got the status of classical language, including Assamese, Bangla, etc. What's my take on this? This classical and quantum debate. Classical versus quantum. Okay, that's physics, right? Classical. This what's the definition of a classical language? What's the definition? What's the definition of a classical dance versus a quantum dance or a non-classical dance? Why do we need to have this terminology and this thing of attaching a certain kind of tag on a language? I don't get it. Make every language a classical language. Assamese, I mean, look, how old is Assamese as a language? Not quite sure. It's one of the newer upper branch languages, newer in the context of 10,000 years of Indian civilization, right? I would say if you want to call something classical, it has to have a certain set of criteria that it meets. The first criterion I would say is a language should be at least 2,000 years old to be a classical language. Do these languages meet those criteria? I don't think so. Only Sanskrit and Tamil meet those criteria. Telugu also, I'm sure. Telugu is probably older than Tamil. Um, so, from that viewpoint, only two or three languages can be classical languages. And obviously, these languages, if you want to call them classical languages, need to have a tremendous amount of literature, a huge corpus of literature. Now, from that perspective, so I don't know on what basis they've given the title of classical language. I don't know what's the purpose of doing this. I think it's got some kind of political purpose. If you truly value your languages, then why don't you do something to promote them instead of putting a tag on them? Classical language. India, India's leaders are all words, no action. All words, all slogans, no action. If you want to promote Assamese, why don't you give 2,000 scholarships in India? 5-year scholarships to genuine scholars who will produce new literature in Assamese. You gonna do that? No. But you want votes, so you will say Assam is a classical language and Bangla is a classical language. But maybe Dogri is a quantum language, right? And this is just, I mean, what's my take on this? I think this is all nonsense. I think every language is important. Every Indian language is important. And if the government truly values India's culture and language, they'll put their money where their mouth is. Not just put tags on languages to hopefully get some votes. Very, very, I don't know, annoying. Every language should be valued. Every language should be promoted. The government should invest money in the promotion of every language. Give scholarships to scholars and writers and authors who can create new literature in Indian languages. Right? You're gonna have to spend money for that. But will the government do that? No, 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 no. So yeah, it's just it's a farce. It's a joke. It will make a lot of people happy. Indians chase status, right? Oh, my language is now a classical language. What difference does it make in your life? What difference does it make to your language? Are you going to have more output of literature in your language now? Is your language going to last longer now because it's now got the tag of a classical language? It makes no difference in the real world. So when it comes to culture, this government is a horrible non-performer. I'm talking about the Narendra Modi government. Extremely poor performer in terms of culture. They've done nothing for Indian culture. They've done a great deal for India's infrastructure, for India's economy. When it comes to culture, they've done nothing. And that is extremely disappointing. Okay. Sharma says, was Tibet ever a part of India? It was never part of India, but it's part of the Indosphere. Okay, it's part of India's extended sphere of culture and influence. Tibet culturally is Indian. It's got a very different take on Indian culture, a very different manifestation of Indian culture, but it is Indian culture through and through. So Tibet should be part of the Indosphere. We should have protected Tibet in the 1950s. We did not. Our government was, well, you know what it was, wasn't it? But historically, Tibet has never been administered by any Indian emperor, king, empire. Some parts at some points may have been, of course, we know that, but the whole of Tibet, no. So Tibet historically has not been part of India. It's always been in our sphere of influence. Tibet is Tibetan culture is more or less Indian culture in a very different form, and they are our civilizational brothers and sisters, the Tibetans. There are people. Ethnically, they may be different from most Indians. How does it matter? How many times have I said this? DNA doesn't matter, culture matters. So culturally, Tibet is Indian. But geopolitically, or from that perspective, politically, it was never a part of India. And so what? That's fine. But we never had borders and all that with Tibet. Kailash, Mansarovar, that's in Tibet, isn't it? That's one of our holiest pilgrimage sites. And did Indians ever need visas and passports to go there? Never. It's only now, after Tibet came under Chinese occupation, that's happened. So, yeah, that's your answer, sir. Okay. The Knight says, how do Indians deal with rising racism in online and real life? Look, as your country becomes more relevant, and it starts making its own presence felt in the global stage geopolitically, and not as a pushover, not as an apologetic country, but as a country that stands up straight, you're going to face this. Okay? So you're going to face this online, you're going to face this in real life also, perhaps in some places. How do you deal with it? You deal with it. You be assertive. You stand up for yourself. You if you are in a foreign country and you're facing, and you, let's say, you face racism, you got to stand up straight. You got to stand up for yourself. You don't indulge in violence, but you don't take it, and you don't respond by being racist in turn. You don't. You just you've got to be assertive, and you need to know how to handle that. And you Indians, when they travel, they will probably face racism in some countries more than other countries. Um, so it's going to happen, and that's what we call growing pains. Okay, so you got to be mentally prepared for it, first of all, and secondly, you need to be mentally prepared for how you're going to respond to such a situation if it arises, right? So racism can take so many different forms, and depending on the context, you deal with it in different ways. So the first thing you have to do is to be mentally prepared. You have to know what racism is. hmm, if you're going out for the first time, or if you're going online for the first time, you need to know what racism is. And racism is different online, racism is different in real life. It's sometimes more subtle in real life, sometimes it's more in your face in real life. Online, it's just blatant, it's just non-stop. You just ignore it, who cares, right? um so first of all, you need to acknowledge that racism exists. You need to know what racism is. You need to know what are the signs and symptoms of racism. You need to know how to handle that. All of that you have to do you have to prepare yourself mentally for it, and that's how you deal with it. But it's gonna be there. It's gonna rise. It's gonna increase. Okay. Okay, let's talk about aliens. Xmas, Ymas, Zemus. What are my views on UFO UAP topic? If they release 4K videos, won't that create chaos in the West, like War of the Worlds? Sanatanis will be chilling with mint juleps with Mahadev in heart. Okay, I don't know what that last portion is, and what does it have to do with UFOs and UAPs? UFOs is not United, unidentified flying objects. UAP is unidentified aerial phenomena. What's my opinion on this? It looks like it exists. Looks like it exists only in the West, only in the US, more or less. You don't see too much of that in India, for example, or China, or Asia. You see a lot of that in the US, which kind of raises certain questions. Either the aliens only like the US as a place to visit, or it's not aliens, but it's actually classified technology. Maybe it is Lockheed Martin technology. Maybe it's Boeing technology if it doesn't crash. Okay, maybe they have achieved certain technological breakthroughs that allow them to test such aircraft, spacecraft, whatever. So that's what I think. Look, I've said this so many times. Regular viewers will know this, that emerging technologies, new technologies, they typically are first made available to militaries, and they are kept hidden secret for decades before some percentage of the technology is released to the in the public domain, just a little bit. So if you have a certain amount of AI capabilities that are visible in the public eye, you can be sure that the US military will have an AI that's at least 100 times more powerful than what you have access to. And similarly, and so on. So most likely, if these UFOs, UAPs are actual genuine phenomena, then it most likely represents a classified technology that is being tested or deployed by the American military. That's what I think it is. And that's why 4K footage will not be released. Okay, let's take a few more questions. Annabeth Jackson says, where do you think the real power lies in India? As you mentioned, that in democracies, when you have a democracy, that often hides where the real power resides. So where does the real power lie in India? In India, the real power is distributed and it's diffused. It's not in one single place. So if you go back 2,500 years, most of the power, when you had the Maurya Empire, the beginning of the Maurya Empire, that time in India, most of the power lay with Chandragupta Maurya, the emperor of India. A couple of generations later, most of the power in the subcontinent lay in the hands of Ashok Maurya. Okay? And he controlled the whole subcontinent. His one word could change the fate of a whole region, depending on whatever policy or whatever pronouncement he made. That was concentration of power. When you have a subcontinent sized nation, you need that sort of thing. In today's India, where does power lie? A little bit of power lies in the hands of the prime minister and the central government. Significantly more power lies if you're living in any city or village. A lot more power lies in your state government, right? In your district magistrate, in the hands of your district magistrate, in the police forces, the bureaucracy, the judiciary. So in India, the power is distributed. You have a federal system, you have a very powerful bureaucracy, you have a very powerful judiciary, and so on. Um, so that's how it is. India is a very decentralized kind of country. And that's why you can't have a coup in India. On the one hand, it's good, and on the other hand, it's terrible because you have such a weak central government, right? So the central government can take care of economic policy, foreign policy, defense policy. Beyond that, everything else is the dominion of the state governments, and they decide what happens. And the central government can't do too much about it, unless it's a national security issue. And even in the case of national security issues like illegal immigration, the central government seems to be doing nothing about things in certain states without naming those states. So in India, the real power lies all around the place. It's all distributed. It's not the way things should be. As a nation the size of India, you need to have a very strong central government. Only then can things happen in India quickly. In today's world, the faster a nation, the smaller is the time gap between a decision that is taken and action is done. As soon if the delay is small, then the nation will do better. The more agile nation you are, the more agile a nation you are, the more you will succeed in the 21st century. In India, agility, forget about agility, inertia. So in India, the power is distributed. Lots of politicians have small amounts of power in every city, in every village, in every district. Lots of institutions, not lots, small number of institutions have a lot of power. They can stand up to the state, to the central government if they wish to. They can arm twist the central government and have elections conducted in some state if they want to. So the central government is in a nation like India, the way it is structured, it's extremely weak, very weak. So India doesn't have a deep state like the US has. The US has a very powerful, very centralized deep state. All the real power lies there. All the real power lies there. In India, all distributed. That's why it's a nation that's always at odds with itself. Various parts of the nation are trying to pull the nation in different directions, and the end result is that nothing happens and the nation goes nowhere. So it's because of the way the nation was created, it was constructed, the constitution and the laws and the structure and all that, the governance structure, all that. It's designed to keep in India perpetually immobile in a state of constant inertia, and that's why India has never been able to become even a good nation rather than a great nation. India is capable of incredible greatness, but it's been designed. The system has been designed to ensure India never becomes great. There you have it, Annabeth. Okay. Uh, Vikram says, why doesn't India have aviation companies like Boeing, Airbus, Bombardier, Lockheed Martin? Those are all private companies in the US. Uh, Bombardier was in the US, right? But Lockheed Martin, Airbus is European, and so on. These are private companies. In India, can a private company start designing and creating aircraft, you need a lot of capital for that, a lot of money. And for the longest time, private enterprise was stifled in India. And even today, it's so hard to do business in India. Whether you're a small time entrepreneur, whether you're a medium business, whether a big business, all kinds of problems. India isn't the nicest place for doing business. So lots of problems, right? I wish you had these companies like these in India. Would have been great. I wish there was a company or multiple companies like SpaceX in India, but we don't have it. The government has to create the right atmosphere, the right environment for such companies to emerge and take off. So we have one private aerospace startup of some kind. I forget the name, that's come up and that's launched a couple of solid state rockets. Not good beginnings, but why don't we have 30 of those? So the government's job is to create the right kind of environment for such companies to emerge and then thrive and compete with each other and excel. And because we don't have that environment, that's why India doesn't have such aviation companies. For the longest time, private enterprise was crushed. Now it's not crushed, but things need to be made way better. So that's why. Okay, let's take one final question for today. uh, let us see. What other? Can I take one question? Okay, let's take one question from Geopolitical Dubey. Does hypnosis work? How strong can it be? Hypnosis works. Hypnosis is when you communicate or somebody communicates and reaches out to your subconscious mind. So there are, if you know psychology, you have a conscious mind and a subconscious mind. And the conscious mind is something that you have to struggle against. The subconscious mind is something you can train and so on. The conscious mind is about 5% of who you are, and the subconscious mind may be about 95% of who you are. And hypnosis is all about tapping into the subconscious mind and making suggestions and perhaps making changes in the person's psyche, behavior, and all that. And there is something called auto hypnosis, wherein you hypnotize yourself with your eyes open. It's possible. So hypnosis does work. It can be really strong, it can be really powerful, depending on the subject, the person who is doing it, whether you do it to yourself, whether you're having somebody else doing it to you, and how skilled that person is. Hypnosis is indeed something that exists. It certainly does work, and I would know because I know. Okay. All right. Okay, we're done with today's episode. Aerolophiles is already saying good night. So yes, thank you very much. Good day, good night to all of you. Thank you so much for all the questions, and I will see you in the episode or episodes that come up next week. Next week we're going to have episodes, and I look forward to taking your questions then. So it's been a break for me last week or so, but I'm back now, and we're going to continue. So thank you so much for your questions. Keep asking questions, keep raising your standards, and I will see you very soon. Thank you so much. Good day, good night.